Avoidants build their whole sense of safety on one quiet assumption, that no matter how they behave, no matter how many times they pull away, go cold, or ignore what hurts you will always be there to hold the connection together. And for a long time, you prove them right. You chase when they retreat. You explain when they go silent. You soften when they are harsh. You apologize when you are the one in pain. And slowly, without meaning to, you train them to believe that they can keep their walls up and still have you, that they can keep playing with distance and you'll keep bridging the gap. Their sense of control doesn't come from real emotional power. It comes from the pattern where you constantly move toward them and they don't have to move toward you. That's the game. And they don't even fully realize it's a game until you stop playing. The moment you stop chasing, something fundamental shifts. You might not make a big speech. You might not even tell them what you're doing, but your behavior changes. You no longer double text. You no longer send paragraphs trying to decode their tone. You no longer answer immediately just to prove you care. You stop explaining the same hurt 100 different ways, hoping that this time they'll finally understand. Instead, you let your silence speak where your words once screamed. You feel the urge to run after them when they withdraw, and instead you sit with that urge and choose not to. That is the moment their false sense of control starts to crumble, because the system they relied on, push you away, watch you come closer, is no longer responding. They pull, but nothing moves. When you stop over-explaining, you also stop cushioning the blow of their behavior. Before, every time they did something damaging, you rushed in with context and compassion. I know you've been through a lot. I know you're scared. I know you don't mean to hurt me. And while that empathy makes you a beautiful person, it also protected them from feeling the full impact of what they were doing. You took their guilt away before it could settle. You made excuses for them so they didn't have to confront themselves. You smoothed over every sharp edge with your understanding. When you stop doing that, they're left alone with the raw consequence. They send a cold message, and you no longer respond with warmth to balance it. They disappear, and you don't chase to keep the connection alive. They make a sarcastic or dismissive remark, and you don't swallow it and pretend it didn't land. Now they sit with the echo. For the first time, their choices don't simply bounce off your endless patience. They hit a wall, your boundary. Avoidants lose control, not because you suddenly become rude or cruel, but because they realize they were never actually in control of anything but their own avoidance. You were the one regulating the relationship. You were the one deciding it would survive every distance. You were the one carrying all the emotional weight. When you put that weight down, the illusion breaks. They see that they cannot just vanish and reappear without consequences. They see that they cannot keep you half fulfilled, half assured, half respected, and still have guaranteed access to your heart. They realize your love is not a permanent safety net they can fall into whenever they feel lonely. It is something that can be lost, and that awareness is where their power starts to feel very fragile. What unnerves them most is that this shift doesn't come with drama. It comes with calm. You're not threatening, not begging, not performing your pain. You're simply not doing the things you used to do to make it easy for them. You don't jump to soothe their ego. You don't rescue every conversation. You don't rush to reassure them every time they act indifferent. You start living from a place where their behavior informs your boundaries instead of your fear, and that is when the dynamic flips. They can no longer predict you the way they once did, because your reactions are no longer driven by their pull-push dance. They're driven by your self-respect. That unpredictability, born from your healing, not from games, is what shakes their confidence. Inside, they start to question the script they've always believed. They'll never leave. They need me more than I need them. And that script is what allowed them to play with your heart so casually. As your chasing, over-explaining, and cushioning stop, they are left face to face with the truth they tried to avoid, that you are not controllable through crumbs, that your love is not endlessly stretchable, that their behavior does have limits, and you are willing to walk when the cost becomes your peace. That is the exact moment the game ends for them. Not because you shouted that it's over, but because your quiet refusal to keep participating took the power out of their hands and put it back into yours, where it always belonged. There comes a moment in this story where the loudest thing you do is absolutely nothing. Where instead of another speech, another essay, another emotional breakdown, you simply make a quiet decision inside yourself, a decision to choose you over the cycle. And that one invisible shift changes more than any dramatic goodbye ever could. For so long, every move you made was about keeping the connection alive. You double-texted when they didn't reply. You chased closure when they went distant. You explained your heart in 100 different ways, hoping this time they'd finally understand. You fixed the misunderstandings they created. You initiated the talks they avoided. And all of that taught their ego one thing, that no matter how they showed up, you would do the heavy lifting. You would keep the story going. When you stop, when you say to yourself, I am no longer willing to live in this loop, even before they know it, the energy between you starts to change. That decision doesn't always come in a heroic, confident moment. Sometimes it comes in pure exhaustion. In that night where you stare at your phone, knowing they've seen your message and chosen silence again. And instead of drafting another heartfelt follow-up, you put the phone down and whisper, I can't keep doing this to myself. Your heart feels heavy, your body feels tired, and your spirit is done negotiating for the bare minimum. You don't announce this shift to them because it isn't really about them. It's about you reaching your internal limit, the point where your nervous system can't tolerate being in fight or flight over one person's attention anymore. That quiet decision is the moment you step out of the role you've been playing, the role of the fixer, the explainer, the one who keeps cleaning the emotional floor while they keep tracking mud through your life. Choosing yourself over the cycle doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop trying to repair what only breaks from one side. You stop double texting not because you're playing games, but because you see how humiliating it feels to beg for basic effort. You stop begging not because your pride suddenly got huge, but because you realize your begging has never created real change, only temporary guilt. You stop fixing because you finally see that every time you glue the pieces back together alone, you teach them they never have to learn how to hold anything carefully. Your no more is not cold. It's protective. It's you stepping between your own heart and the pattern that keeps wounding it. Their ego has been fed by your predictability. They've depended on the fact that no matter how far they push, the rubber band always snaps back in their direction. Your quiet decision cuts that band. You start taking your energy somewhere else, to people who reciprocate, to routines that calm you, to goals that are about you and not about getting a reaction. And without meaning to, you starve the cycle of the fuel it needs, your constant, frantic effort. Where you used to send a long message, now you write it in your journal. Where you used to call 3 times, now you call a friend. Where you used to sit there agonizing over their last cold reply, now you get up, drink water, go outside, move your body, do something that reminds you that life exists beyond this emotional maze. This breaks the pattern their ego depended on, because their ego doesn't want to be truly intimate. It wants to be chased. It wants to be meted. It wants to feel in control without doing the work of being consistent. And they could only feel that way as long as you allowed your fear of losing them to be bigger than your fear of losing yourself. When you flip that, when you become more afraid of living another year in this cycle than you are of them walking away, your behavior stops feeding their ego and starts feeding your own healing. They feel the difference, even if they can't name it. Where they once felt entitled to your explanations, all they meet now is a calm wall. Where they once expected you to show up after every disappearing act, All they get now is your absence and their own echo. The beauty of this quiet decision is that it brings your sense of power back on the inside. Before, every spike of anxiety sent you outward toward them, trying to pull reassurance from their attention. Now, each wave of anxiety becomes a cue to go inward, to soothe yourself, to remind yourself of the truth. I am worthy of mutual effort. I am not crazy for wanting consistency. I am allowed to stop participating in what hurts me. And every time you choose that inner path, instead of running back to the same dynamic, you reinforce the new pattern. Bit by bit, your nervous system starts to trust you again. It realizes you will no longer drag it through the same trauma just to avoid sitting with the temporary loneliness. You begin to experience small moments of peace, of clarity, of distance, where you see the cycle for what it was, unsustainable. From the outside, it might look like nothing happened. You didn't have a huge fight, you didn't block them in rage, you simply stopped playing the role that kept their ego safe and the game alive. But inside, everything has happened. The quiet decision to choose yourself over the cycle marks the end of the version of you who tolerated emotional chaos as the price of love, and the beginning of the version of you who will never again confuse being chosen occasionally with being cherished consistently. When their usual breadcrumbs no longer pull you back, something happens inside the avoidant that they never prepared for, because for the longest time they relied on a simple formula. Give you just enough to keep you emotionally hooked, a late-night hey, a random heart on your story, a nostalgic message when they feel you slipping, and then pull away again, trusting that your heart will do the rest of the work. They didn't have to fully show up. They didn't have to take responsibility. They didn't have to be consistent, because every small, lazy gesture from them used to reignite all the love and hope in you, and that was their unspoken safety net. Their ego counted on your nervous system being conditioned to grab every crumb as if it were a feast. Your entire body once reacted to those breadcrumbs like oxygen after suffocating. Your heart would race, your mind would spin, and instantly, you'd be back in the loop, reassuring them, pursuing them, reopening yourself to a person who never actually closed the gap properly. A breadcrumb can be as simple as, I miss you, typed in the middle of the night when they're lonely, with no follow-through the next day. A vague, we should hang out, that never becomes a plan. A sudden burst of affection after weeks of neglect. A deep conversation that leads nowhere in reality. A carefully timed like or comment just when you were beginning to detach. They are small, inconsistent, emotionally loaded signals designed, consciously or not, to wake up your attachment and calm their fear that they've pushed you too far. And for a long time, it works. You see their name pop up and your heart overrides your memory. You forget how long they left you on red, how you cried alone while they needed space. You forget the anxiety in your stomach and cling to the tiny bit of warmth they're offering, because you are starving for just a sign that they still care. But then something inside you shifts. You've been hurt too many times. You've replayed the same pattern enough to predict exactly where the breadcrumbs lead, and your body is tired of walking down that road. You read the "Hey stranger" message, and instead of butterflies, you feel a deep exhale of truth. You know this is not a new chapter. It's the same page. You know that if you rush to respond with all your heart, you will end up right back in the familiar pain. And slowly, you begin to choose differently. Maybe you don't answer right away. Maybe you don't answer at all. Maybe your response is neutral, simple, with no extra emotional labor attached. You don't rescue the conversation. You don't pour out your soul because they finally typed 3 vulnerable sentences. You let the message be exactly what it is, small, and you let your reaction match that reality instead of your fantasy. When the breadcrumbs stop working on you, the avoidant loses one of their most powerful illusions, the illusion of guaranteed access. For so long, they believed that your heart was an open door they could walk in and out of whenever they were bored, lonely, or craving validation. They believed that no matter how carelessly they handled you, Your feelings for them would stay exactly where they left them, waiting, unchanged. But when they send the usual, "I miss us," and the ocean doesn't part, when they react to your story and you don't take that as an invitation to reattach, when they test the waters with half effort and are met with calm distance instead of frantic engagement, something in their mind cracks. They are forced to confront a truth they never wanted to face, that your heart is not an infinite resource, that your attention is not a birthright, that your love, no matter how deep, is not a permission slip for them to show up however they please. This realization doesn't always show on their face. They might try to play it cool, tell themselves, "They're just busy. They're trying to make me chase." They might send a few more crumbs, push a little harder, suddenly open up more than they have before, or, on the other side, get irritated and label you as cold or different. But under all of that noise is a very simple shock. The equation they relied on has changed. What used to bring you running now barely moves you. What used to guarantee a response now earns them silence or polite detachment. And that unsettles their ego more deeply than they will ever admit out loud. Because their power was never in loving you better. It was in knowing how to trigger your longing. When that longing finally stops jumping every time they snap their fingers, they have to see themselves more clearly. They can no longer hide behind the belief that you'll always be there. Your non-response, your slow response, your measured response, all translate to the same message. You no longer have me on a string. And whether they grow from that or run from it, that's their path. But for you, this is the moment your heart quietly steps off the stage, no longer available for half love and half effort, no longer rushing to turn crumbs into a meal, no longer confusing sporadic attention with genuine commitment. You are not rejecting love. You are rejecting being played. And the day their breadcrumbs stop working is the day they learn that access to you is earned with consistency, respect, and real presence, not occasional flashes of interest whenever it suits their comfort. When you finally detach, not as a performance, but as a result of deep inner work, the avoidance system reacts, sometimes with panic, sometimes with anger, sometimes with sudden warmth and love bombing. And it can feel so confusing that you start questioning yourself again. Yet all of those reactions are really just proof of impact, not proof that you should hand your power back. For a long time you trained them, without meaning to, that no matter how far they pushed you, you would still be there, still explaining, still chasing, still trying to fix what they kept breaking. So when you pull your energy back, their nervous system feels the shock. It's like the background music they were used to has suddenly stopped. The constant hum of your attention, your availability, your emotional labor goes quiet, and silence is louder to an avoidant than any speech you ever gave. Their ego interprets that quiet as a loss of control, and that's when the reactions start. They might panic and suddenly flood you with messages, long overdue apologies, promises, confessions about how much you meant to them. They might show up with big words, "I get it now, I was wrong, I don't want to lose you." And because you are human and loving, those words hit a place in you that's been starving to hear exactly that. Your heart aches, your eyes tear up, and the old pattern tries to wake up. The part of you that thinks, "Finally, this is what I waited for. Maybe now it's safe to go back." But here is where your inner work matters. This is where you remember that panic is a feeling, not a transformation. Regret is a feeling, not a strategy. You watch their reaction and, instead of immediately merging with it, you let it breathe. You give it time. You ask yourself, does this come from a place of true readiness to change? Or is it a reaction to losing the comfort of me? Sometimes it's not panic, it's anger. They might accuse you of being cold, of changing, of giving up too fast. They might try to flip the narrative, painting you as the problem, as if the months or years of you trying, explaining, forgiving, and holding on never happened. Anger is easier for a fragile ego to feel than vulnerability. Because behind their anger is fear. Fear that they no longer have access to your heart on their terms. Fear that you are not playing the same role anymore. Fear that their go-to behavior finally had consequences. Your old self would have rushed in at this point, defending yourself, over-explaining, apologizing for hurting them even when you were just protecting yourself. Their anger would have pulled you back into the ring, trying desperately to make them see your side. But your new self, the one who has done inner work, does something different. You might feel the sting, you might feel misunderstood, but you don't let their anger dictate your next move. You recognize it as a defense mechanism, not as a verdict on your worth. You know the truth of what you lived. You don't need their version to override it, so you don't rush to fix their feelings anymore. You let them own their reaction. And then there's the sudden warmth, the version where they go from distant to very affectionate, very present, very all in, sending songs, memories, inside jokes, maybe even talking about a future. It feels like the partner you always wanted is finally stepping forward. And that can be the most tempting moment to abandon yourself again, because it looks like everything you hoped for. But your inner work has taught you to ask a crucial question. Can they sustain this when the fear of losing me is no longer sharp? You look beyond the intensity and watch for consistency, beyond the words and into the pattern. And you remember that your job is not to be seduced by potential anymore. Your job is to protect your peace. You don't shut your heart down completely, but you no longer throw it wide open just because they're suddenly warm. You let them show with time, with actions, who they really are when they're not reacting to the threat of loss. The real shift is that their reactions, whether it's panic, anger, sudden softness, or a mix of all three, no longer control your decisions. Before, you were on a leash that was tied to their emotional state. If they were distant, you chased. If they were upset, you over-apologized. If they were loving, you forgave everything and reset your boundaries to 0. They moved, and you reflexively followed, like your entire nervous system was wired around keeping them regulated at the expense of your own regulation. Your inner work is what cuts that leash. Now when they move, you don't automatically respond. You pause. You check in with yourself. You ask, what do I need? What does my body feel around them? What did history teach me? And then you choose from that place, not from fear, not from loneliness, not from nostalgia, but from self-respect. Their reaction becomes information, not instruction, data, not destiny. You can care and still not go back. You can empathize with their panic and still maintain your distance. You can see their sudden warmth and still insist on watching whether it grows roots. You can hear their anger and refuse to shrink yourself to make it stop. That is the power of inner work. It doesn't erase your feelings, it gives you a bigger container for them, so that someone else's storm doesn't automatically blow you off your own foundation anymore. And the avoidant may or may not ever understand the depth of that shift. They may think you're different now, hard, cold, changed. But what you actually are is finally free. Free to let their emotions belong to them, while your choices belong to you. Your healing doesn't start the day they apologize. It starts the day you stop making your emotional life depend on what they do next. And that is when a completely different kind of power begins to grow inside you. A power that has nothing to do with pretending you don't care, and everything to do with learning how to hold your own heart even when it's aching, instead of handing it back to the person who kept dropping it. Emotional independence is not numbness, it's not coldness, it's not acting like they meant nothing. It's the ability to sit with the reality that you still miss them sometimes. You still think about them. You still feel that sting when a memory pops up. And yet you choose, with full awareness, not to go back into a dynamic that requires you to abandon yourself in order to be loved. Before, every wave of missing them sent you running toward them, opening the chat, scrolling the old photos, drafting a message, convincing yourself that peace would return the moment you heard back from them. You treated their response as medicine for your nervous system. And every time you did that, you taught your body, we cannot calm down without them. Healing reverses that message. Slowly, painfully, but surely, you start learning how to ride those waves without reaching for them as your lifeboat. At first, it feels impossible. Your chest tightens. The urge to reach out is intense. Your mind is screaming, just check on them. Just send one message. And your old self would have obeyed that urge without question. But the healing version of you pauses, takes a breath, and asks, what happens after I send this? Will anything truly change? Or will I just reopen the same wound? And you start choosing differently. Not because you don't care, but because you finally understand the cost of soothing yourself with someone who is also the source of your anxiety. You turn inward instead. You journal, you cry, you go for a walk, you call someone who actually shows up for you. You move your body, you drink water, you sit with the discomfort instead of trying to outrun it. And little by little, your nervous system learns a new truth. We can feel this and survive it without running back into the fire. Every time you don't break your own boundary just to stop the ache, you build emotional muscle, self-trust, and those are the foundations of independence. Emotional independence doesn't mean you never want them again. It means that want no longer dictates your choices. You can see their name and feel a tug, but you don't let that tug drag you back into confusion. You can hear that they're struggling and feel genuine compassion, but you don't automatically volunteer to be their healer, therapist, and emotional nurse for free. You can remember the good moments and smile without letting those memories erase the nights you cried yourself to sleep because of their inconsistency. In other words, you don't gaslight yourself anymore. You don't cherry-pick the fantasy and throw away the reality. Your healing gives you the courage to look at the whole picture, love and pain together, and then make a decision that honors you, not just your longing. As you grow emotionally independent, the way you relate to your own feelings changes. You stop labeling yourself as crazy, needy, or too much, just because you wanted more than crumbs. You stop apologizing inside your own head for being someone who desires depth. You start to understand that your triggers, your anxiety, your tears were signals, not flaws. Signals that your nervous system was in a situation it didn't feel safe in. And instead of shaming yourself for those signals, you start to thank them. You were trying to warn me, I ignored you, but I hear you now. That self-validation is part of your healing, and it unhooks your worth from their behavior. No longer do you think, if they don't come back, it means I wasn't enough. Instead, you begin to see, if they don't come back with full effort, it means they're not capable or willing to meet the level of love I know I give. Emotional independence is also what keeps you from falling for temporary performances of change. They might return with tears, with apologies, with big words about how they see it now. And the old you would have rushed back into their arms, desperate to believe, terrified of missing your chance. But the healed you watches, listens, and remembers. You don't shut your heart off, but you let time tell you the truth. You look for consistency. You look for accountability. You look for whether their actions match the pain they say they've caused. And if they don't, you don't abandon yourself in order to keep the connection. You know that you can grieve a person and still protect yourself from their patterns, and that knowledge keeps you from being dragged back into Chapter 1 when your soul is already in Chapter 5. In the end, your healing gives you something far more valuable than their approval. It gives you you. The version of you who doesn't beg anyone to see your worth, who doesn't break her own heart to keep someone else comfortable, who doesn't confuse chemistry with safety or intensity with love. You may still think about them, you may still feel sadness, You may even always have a small, tender place in your heart with their name on it. But you will not sacrifice your peace to re-enter a story where you had to lose yourself just to keep your place. That is emotional independence, not the absence of feeling, but the presence of self-respect strong enough to hold those feelings without letting them drive you back into the same pain that taught you how much you deserved better.